Namaskar. I welcome you all again on the second day of the 130th session of the Brahmo Conference. In the beginning, Reverend Abhi Janamanchi will address the audience. We are very fortunate to have Reverend Abhi Janamanchi amidst us today. Reverend Abhi Janamanchi serves as Senior Minister of Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in Bethesda, Maryland. Born and raised in southern India, he moved to US in 1994. He is a third generation member of Brahmo Samaj. We know that ties of Brahmo Samaj to Unitarian Universalism date back to 1828 when Brahmo Samaj was founded. Abhi Janamanchi graduated from Midville Lombard Theological School, Chicago in 1998. Before being called to Cedar Lane, he served congregations in Clearwater, Florida, Madison, Wisconsin, and Park Forest, Illinois. He has been active in international interfaith and multicultural work for over 2 decades. He served as president of the International Association for Religious Freedom, IARF. His Unitarian, Universalist, Brahmo Hindu faith, his Indian heritage, and his American citizenship inspire and guide him in life and ministry. He and his wife Lalita reside in Rockville, Maryland. They have 2 young adult sons. Recently, in the national level online Brahmopasana program of Brahmo and Prarthana Samajas in India, Reverend Abhi Janamanchi had addressed the audience and also conducted prayer services in the online Upasanas of Deccan Brahmo Samaj, Hyderabad. We are pleased to welcome you again, Reverend Abhi Janamanchi, to address the audience of this online session of Brahmo Conference hosted by Pune Prarthana Samaj. Over to you, Reverend Abhi Janamanchi.
Namaskar, good afternoon. I'm the Reverend Abhi Janamanchi. I serve a Unitarian Universalist congregation here in the United States in Bethesda, Maryland. I've been serving as a Unitarian Universalist minister for over 22 years, having come to this country to study at Midville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. And after graduating, I have been serving congregations all over the U.S. I'm also a third generation member of the Brahmo Samaj and continue to be a Brahmo and a Unitarian Universalist. The connections between Brahmo Samaj and Unitarian Universalism are long-standing, going back to Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who was deeply influenced by Unitarian thought and ideals and founded the Brahmo Samaj in 1828. Also, Hindu and Buddhist teachings greatly influenced the ideas and thoughts of people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, who were both Unitarians and in turn inspired the Transcendentalist movement here in the United States in the 19th century. So I'm honored to be a part of that great lineage of being a connector, a bridge between these 2 great religious traditions. And I'm honored to be invited to share a sermon at the Brahmo Conference's 130th session being held on the occasion of the post-centennial Golden Jubilee of Pune Prarthana Samaj. I have wonderful and fond memories of attending the Brahmo Conference that was hosted by the Pune Prarthana Samaj in Lonavala in 1993 when I was 24 years old, and remember participating in a panel discussion about the future of the Brahmo Samaj and the role youth can play to grow and transform the Brahmo Samaj. I have continued to maintain both my spiritual roots and my connections to the Brahma Samaj all these years. And my Brahmo faith is informed, guided, and inspired by the immortal words of Acharya Keshav Chandra Sen, who wrote this: "Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets a harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides and always magnifies all that unifies and brings peace, which seeks truth in freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all sects, classes, nations, and races one global community. Unto this church and unto all its members, known and unknown throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hands and our hearts." Powerful words, inspiring words, prophetic words, relevant words. Because these words that Acharya Keshav Sen penned in the 19th century hold true to this day, not just in India, but also here in the United States. And to me, in many ways, captures the essence of what the Brahma Samaj is and what its prophetic role is in the world today. So that brings me to the theme of the conference this year, which is orienting the Pune Prarthana Samaj to connect to the youth. It is important for the Brahmo and Prarthana Samajas to be connecting to the youth of today in India and provide a container in which the youth can be inspired, informed, guided, and motivated to live out the values and the ideals of the Brahma Samaj. And it is also important for the Brahma Samaj and the Prarthana Samaj to create a flexible pathway and structure in which the youth are able to discern, identify, incorporate, and reimagine a Brahma Samaj that is more in keeping with the needs and the demands of the 21st century. It should not be trying to make the Brahma Samaj of the 19th century fit into the 21st century, because the Brahma Samaj, when it was formed in the 19th century, in 1828, was ahead of its time. It was due to the radical vision of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and the vision of others like Debendranath Tagore and Keshav Chandra Sen and Pratap Chandra Mazumdar and Shivanath Shastri, that the Brahma Samaj was able to stay ahead of the curve, responsive to the social needs, concerns, and challenges of that day, in order to be a radical, liberal religious movement that was engaged in social reform, social upliftment, and working toward the freedom and liberation of Indian people. That was then. What we need to be focusing on today is what can the Brahma Samaj be and do to address the demands of this age in which youth are growing up, so that the Brahma Samaj remains a relevant force for social and spiritual transformation in this day and age. So here are a few thoughts in relation to that. The first one is the identity of India. India is a pluralistic, multicultural country that is one of the world's most religiously diverse nations today. And a pluralistic, multicultural country like India demands a pluralistic, multicultural ministry from the Brahma Samaj. You see, the religious diversity that we know and celebrate and honor in India is not limited to major cities like Mumbai or Kolkata or New Delhi or Chennai or Hyderabad or Bangalore. There are Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists and Christians and Zoroastrians living in small towns and villages all across India. Pluralism, multiculturalism, diversity are not problems that threaten the consensus of a religious and moral mainstream, but are extraordinarily spiritual and social realities and have profound implications in every aspect of Indian life. And so, how Indian people engage with one another in shaping an inclusive and welcoming society is one of the greatest challenges that we face today. And if the Brahma Samaj is to remain a vital and relevant religious movement, it must learn to respond to, adapt, engage with, and embody the larger multicultural and pluralistic reality that it is a part of. And so the demand and imperative of pluralism challenges us as Brahmos to move beyond mere tolerance, which today tends more often to be a shield for perpetuating intolerance and prejudice. Tolerance, you see, can enable coexistence, but it is no way to be good neighbors. And if anything, the Brahma Samaj as a religious movement is well equipped, theologically at least, to face up to this task. Because Brahmoism views pluralism as a blessing and not a curse. Though there are real challenges in being part of a pluralistic community, we experience this diversity as a source of richness, a source of learning and growth, not a pernicious problem. So I submit that the Brahma Samaj at its best celebrates unity in diversity and teaches us to learn to seek wholeness in and through our common humanity. And that is what I feel the imperative is for the Brahma Samaj to be focusing on as one of the first demands of its relevance today. Another demand, I would say, is that we learn to be balanced yet agile. That is, to take serious matters seriously and ourselves more lightly. That is, to maintain a sense of humor. You see, it is quite possible to be terribly and terminally earnest, especially in moral and religious things, and lose sight of our common humanity. Sometimes when we get stuck on theological issues or particular rituals and customs that have developed over the years and focus more on the form rather than its presence and impact and how it in turn leads us into actually living lives of hope, integrity, and service in the world, we become more earnest and more serious and really not focus on the larger task at hand. So to be whole and human requires an inner balance that invites us to take ourselves more lightly and our mission more seriously. And that perhaps only the cultivation of a religious community can help sustain in us. For you see, the speed addicted, attention deficit, instant gratification seeking world in which we live in demands an agile response. Our lives are rushed and harried, our hearts and souls are anxious, and our relationships more neglected, perhaps more than ever before. So, how infrequent it is in our daily lives that we pause to reflect, to wait, to wonder, and to ponder. So, a liberal ministry in our age must be agile indeed to help us stop, to see our lives more often, more constantly under the aspect of eternity. Our lives not as they seem as they pass us by, but as they will remain when their story is over. So, A Brahmo ministry must be agile indeed to bring to our lives a sensibility that is both timely and timeless. For there is no such thing as naked truth at any time, at least so far as moral subjects are concerned. Truth, which related to God and to duty, to happiness and our future, is always humanized by passing through a human mind. So, in our accelerated age, the demand is to be agile, nimble, adaptable, self aware, calm, non anxious, humble, and humane. And the demand has never been greater than it is today. Because our religion owes much of its power to the power of the life of the person who communicates it, and the greater the enlargement and the development of the mind and the heart from which it has possessed itself and from which it flows, the wider and deeper would be its actions on other souls. Which is why one of the chief demands of this age is a prophetic ministry. The age is in many respects a corrupt one, said Raja Ram Mohan Roy in 1824, and demands a spirit of reform, with which he launched many social reform activities. That much has not changed at all to this day. His call for a transformed religious liberalism is as relevant today as it was 196 years ago. The historical situation and the intellectual climate and the political climate today are quite different, yes. Nevertheless, it is striking to see how our sense that we are living in a time of spiritual, social, and moral crisis, and our uncertainty about the ability of liberalism to respond effectively to the needs of the age have not abated but only deepened. In consequence, liberalism and the Brahma Samaj are laboring under a disabling tentativeness and identity confusion. So, if we are to be a relevant force for spiritual and social transformation once again, both within and in the larger society, we must figure out a way to rescue the Brahma Samaj from its long standing individualist, dogmatic, and self focused captivities that sometimes keep it entrenched in the 19th century. Otherwise, we run the risk of becoming a religious decompression chamber or a way station for those passing from fundamentalism to bland secularism. Now, we've been drifting in this direction for a long time now, and it is time we got more focused on who we are called to be and what our mission is in the larger world. And it needs to begin from within, and it needs to begin with our youth. Our country is in the midst of a moral, social, and spiritual crisis. A harsh and deepening divide between people fostered and fueled by fear and hatred of the other, where bigotry and discrimination are being promoted as nationalistic ideals. We cannot pretend to stand outside all this, nor can we afford to ignore it or be indifferent or retreat into safe little liberal bubbles, striving to keep our people comfortable. There is way too much at stake, friends. So, the question that I have been holding in my mind and my heart these days is whether I am, despite my best intentions, despite my religious hopes and convictions, holding back from being my best self, loving myself and those around me into health and happiness and wholeness. I wonder if I'm coming to accept a binary world of good and evil, right and wrong, truth and lie, a world just as divided as that religious world of the saved and damned that my Brahmo faith calls me to reject as flawed and ultimately hopeless. The question is whether our Brahmo faith can see us through, point us toward a more hopeful path, offer some tools and support so that we can navigate these troubled, troubling, and perilous times with integrity and hope and joy. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was inspired by the life, teachings, and work of Mahatma Gandhi, and whose satyagraha inspired the civil rights struggle here in the United States in the 1960s. In the heart of the civil rights struggle movement, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King preached a sermon on March 17, 1966, in which he talked about the need to be maladjusted. Not adjusted, but maladjusted. He said, and I quote, "There are some things in our nation and in our world to which I am proud to be maladjusted. I never intend to adjust myself to segregation and discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, and leave millions of people perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of prosperity. I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism and war and to the self-defeating effects of physical violence. I call upon you to be maladjusted to such things." Now, Dr. King preached this sermon in 1966. He may as well have preached it today, both in the United States and in India. So the last demand, if the Brahma Samaj needs to be relevant, vital, and an effective force for social and spiritual transformation in India today, is for it to be socially maladjusted and divinely dissatisfied. We need to be maladjusted, but by being grounded in revolutionary love. I say this because the revolutionary love I'm talking about is not a feeling, but a decision. It is not a greeting card moment, but an action, a gritty way of being, moving, and witnessing to our beliefs and our values in the world. This love is not a spiritual choice, but a moral imperative. It is this revolutionary love that will call us to look upon the faces of those different from us as our brothers and our sisters. It is this revolutionary love that will call us to weep when their bodies are cast out, beaten, broken, lynched, or destroyed. It is this revolutionary love that will give us the courage to rise even when our voice trembles and our body shakes in fear. And it is this revolutionary love that is going to impel us to stay engaged in the face of bigotry and hate. This is the revolutionary love of our Brahmo heritage that was lifted up by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Devendranath Tagore, Keshav Chandra Sen, Shivanath Shastri, and others, that is centered in the many teachings of the Brahma Samaj, that will not let us go or let us down or let us off the hook. And this is the revolutionary love we must take into our country and into the world to break down the walls and barriers of ignorance, of hatred, of fear, of division that threaten to keep us apart. And this is the love that will help us be communities of caring when we practice hospitality of the heart and hand, as well as be communities of resistance. Because resistance is what love looks like in the face of hate, in the face of violence, which is what satyagraha means. It is not just truth force, it is also love force. This is the way of being that we must carry out into the world in whatever place we live in and in whatever work we do. And my conviction is that we have not yet risked enough and loved enough. And we do not know what might happen if we did. So I ask you, friends, on this day, are you willing to have your hearts be broken and be filled with revolutionary love for the world, for all people, for yourself, and for the God of your experience and your understanding, and let your broken heart guide you in your lives? Will you respond to the call of revolutionary love with a yes of your love and your lives? Because in a world with so much hatred and violence, we still need a religion like the Brahma Samaj that proclaims the inherent worth, dignity, and divinity of every person. In a world with so much brutality and fear, we need a religion like the Brahma Samaj that seeks justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. In a world with so many persons abused and neglected, we need a Brahma Samaj that calls us to accept one another and encourage one another to spiritual growth. In a world with so much dogmatism and falsehood and idolatry, we need a Brahma Samaj that challenges us to a free and responsible and disciplined search for truth and meaning. And in a world with so much tyranny and oppression, we still need a Brahma Samaj that affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. In a world with so much inequality and strife, we need a Brahma Samaj that strives toward the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And in a world with so much ecological devastation, we need a Brahma Samaj that advocates respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And in a world with so much pain and sorrow, death and dying, uncertainty and despair, we need the Brahma Samaj that teaches our hearts to hope and our hands to serve. Thank you again for this opportunity to be with you and share these few words with you. And I wish you all the best and the many blessings as you continue to engage in ways to grow and transform the Brahma Samaj and the Prarthana Samaj from within in order to be a blessing in the world. Namaste.